insufferable. But this is a good question at the very least. No follow-up, though. Let's hear what Tony Blinken has to say when Thomas Friedman asks him if Jewish lives, aka Israeli lives, matter more than Palestinian lives. And Blinken's response is not compatible with the facts.
As you, I'm sure, felt during your hearing, your conversations, and I've felt it a lot, and this will be my last question on the Middle East. One of the things you hear so often from people, given the high civilian casualties in Gaza, is, does the United States, do Jewish lives matter more than Palestinian and Muslim lives, and Palestinian Christian lives, given the incredible asymmetry in casualties? And I've been asked that. I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
No. Period.
Act like it.
For me, I think for so many of us, what we're seeing every single day in Gaza is gut-wrenching. And the suffering we're seeing among innocent men, women, and children breaks my heart. The question is, what is to be done? We've made judgments about how we thought we could be most effective in trying to shape this in ways to get more humanitarian assistance to people, to get better protections and minimize civilian casualties.
Okay, can you pause it for a sec? It's just, I tried, but had to come up for air at a certain point. The humanitarian assistance, there's a few things I don't want to hear anymore. I don't want to hear this call to war. You don't want to call it a genocide right now until the ICJ comes back or until enough people have died for you to make that determination. That's okay. It's not a war. It's a slaughter, one-sidedly so. The other thing I don't want to hear anymore is about humanitarian assistance because Israel controls Gaza's borders, land and sea, and they control what comes in and what comes out. And this has now been reported in the New York Times, okay, that the aid trucks that are coming in are getting basically taken apart by IDF soldiers, inspected, and if there's like I read about an example about tent poles because tents were included in some of these trucks, but that could be used for a bomb. Turn the whole truck around. They're deliberately preventing aid from coming in. So
starving people.
And they're starving people to death. That is the point. And what alleviates the humanitarian disaster is stopping the bombing, the mass killing, the bombing that destroys hospitals, the bombing that destroys water infrastructure, electricity, the ability for internet access to be accessible, or the internet to be accessible for people in Gaza to get the word out. It's been 7 days of this blackout. And the U.S. government's just like, we're concerned about that. Israel, could you not? Could you not?
That's what's called a fig leaf. It's insulting. It's not meant to be serious. It's just meant to keep it moving.
And the passive language about how it's gut-wrenching. Like, this is not a typhoon. This is not an earthquake. These are acts of human beings by with our bombs, with our tax dollars. These are acts of governments. This is not something natural and unstoppable. It could be stopped by him right now if he wanted to say ceasefire now, or at least you could kind of rein the Israelis back in. And yet we treat this as an act of God to a certain degree, and it would never be done if it was done to white passing people or to people who are aligned with the West. That would never be the framing.
And at every step along the way, not only have we impressed upon Israel its responsibilities to do that, we've seen some progress in areas where, absent our engagement, I don't believe it would have happened. So there are a lot of dogs that didn't bark, but...
Wait, okay, actually, I'm sorry, I paused it again. So absent, let's take that statement a step further.
But you think this is genocide? You should have seen what they would have done.
Yeah, right. So...
Better give them more weapons.
have a second thought. Have a second thought. Then is that the kind of government you want to be supporting? That it would have been a worse genocide had you not been reining them in slightly? Does that not give you pause about the millions and millions of dollars that we provide for them and the millions more that Biden had at least weeks ago made a policy priority? Now he's kind of quietly backing off of it because it's becoming toxic and we're focusing more on Ukraine and border stuff. But let's be clear about about what that means. Keep going.
They bombed a university in 4K with drone footage, and not like bombed it with like a missile, like they mined it and demolished it.
I saw a journalist saying, how would people react if this happened to Cambridge or to Harvard? But the inherent racism of it is that they don't see universities and Palestinian lives in the exact same way.
Yeah, and before we play a little bit more countries should sign on to South Africa's ICJ thing, and people like Blinken should be implicated as well, in my opinion.
There's a threat. There's a threat of that happening. I mean, that's part of what they should be worried about.
Yeah.
Absent our engagement, I don't believe it would have happened. So there are a lot of dogs that didn't bark, but that in no way, shape, or form takes away from the tragedy that we've seen and continue to see. It's why we're
Slaughter.
Relentlessly every single day.
It's not a tragedy. It's slaughter.
All I can tell you, Tom, is just on a purely human level.
Not the level I care about.
It's devastating, but it reinforces the conviction and the commitment to do two things.
When are we going to get
do
to October 7th?
Everything we can in this moment, using our best judgment. And of course, we could be wrong about the judgments we're making. But to try to make a difference in the day in, day out. But it also reinforces.
I hate when politicians start talking like athletes in a post-game press conference, like day in, day out. We're just giving it 110%. No, you are giving arms to the people that you are saying would be doing more slaughter than even the slaughter we're seeing, or dogs not barking or whatever the hell, dogs not killing Palestinian kids, maybe. Like,
we're doing our best. We studied hard for the test, and sometimes you can't get an A+.
And this this woe is me, we're doing our best. It's hard to do it, but you just got to try to make a world a better place. No, that's how a blood-soaked genocide supporter salves his conscience at a public forum like the World Economic Forum.
I have no doubt his job has been difficult over the past few days. Here's the tiniest violin. Few months.
Try to make a difference in the day in, day out, but it also reinforces my conviction that there has to be, and there is, another way that answers Israel's most profound concerns and questions.
Just Israel.
Israelis have to live with security. They can't have a repeat of October 7th.
There we go.
No country would accept a repeat of October 7th. And I think, not by way of justification, but just by way of explanation, it's hard to overstate the psychological impact on the country as a whole of what happened on that day. And there are large swaths of the world, going back to one of the first things you said, where information technology, information environments...
All right, let's pause this for a second.
Yeah, Israel.
So the psychological impact of October 7th. 1,200, 1,400 people killed that day, right? Horrific. Let's say that's a unit of one. Let's split the baby and say 1,300, if we're going to be generous, equals 1 there. So we're now 3,100 or 31,000 Palestinians presumed dead with those who are missing under rubble. So if that's a unit of 1, I'm doing quick math, 31,000 divided by 1,300. That's a magnitude of 23.8 times. So if we're calculating psychological harm, who has the luxury of equating psychological harm and saying that that's a justification for mass slaughter, and who doesn't? Because if we're doing, the math equation of psychological harm justifying slaughter, the Palestinians have about 23.8 times more reason to be psychologically harmed. Yeah. And I'm not even counting the tens of thousands maimed, wounded, permanently disabled because this guy would rather perform empathy at the World Economic Forum than stand up to a seemingly ideologically committed Zionist in Biden and either resign or take a hard line here. The passivity of the language from the one of the top diplomat for the world superpower is astounding.
And it's racism. You don't hear about what the emotions like after IDF shot Palestinian protesters in the Great March of Return like they were prairie dogs coming out of a prairie dog hill. They just gunned them down. You never think about like, well, that might cause a violent reaction because of the psychological effect that all this stuff has. You never do that because to Anthony Blinken and to supporters of Israel, those are savages that exist to be removed.
They're not capable of being psychologically harmed because they're not really cosmopolitan like the Israelis.
It's racists.
Yep. I want to hear more.
Have been used and abused in such a way that large numbers of people don't believe October 7th actually happened. They don't believe that Hamas slaughtered men, women, and children.
This is a straw man.
That it executed parents in front of their kids. That it executed kids in front of their parents. That it burned families alive. They don't believe it. And so, of course, especially with that, everything that followed is even worse. Here's what it comes down to. In my judgment.
Hamas attacked. I'm gonna blow a gasket. Hamas attacked, but everything that happened after is even worse. Active language, passive language. Active attack, passive natural disaster.
Even worse. Here's what it comes down to in my judgment. I think the biggest poison that we face around the world, internally in our societies and externally in our relations with others, is dehumanization. The inability to see the humanity in the other.
That's you, buddy.
And
calls coming from inside the house.
In every direction. And when that happens, you get so hardened that you're willing to do and accept things.
He was flying around the Middle East trying to facilitate the removal of Palestinians under the guise of actually this is good for them because otherwise Israel's going to keep bombing them as it tries to quote unquote fight Hamas, which it's not. It's fighting Palestinians.
Things that you wouldn't if the humanity of the other was front and center in your conscience. So one of our challenges is to fight that dehumanization, to find ways to diffuse it, to take that poison out.
With bombs.
And that's also a function of leadership.
It's demolish our universities.
We need leaders around the world who see that, understand that, and are prepared to act.
South Africa.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's it. I just needed to get to the end because Friedman doesn't follow up. Shocked to hear.
Blinken is a criminal. All these guys are complicit in genocide and ethnic cleansing and a world that, I mean, look, we'll see how the ICJ case proceeds and hopefully is able to stop the slaughter. But
Netanyahu's saying this war in Israeli press, not in English, saying it's going to go through 2025. Okay. This is the bed the Biden administration made. You want to deal with this throughout 2024? But through the election? Hey, you got your wish.
And 2026, one Democratic state from the river to the sea.
Hell yeah. With that said, we have a word from one of our sponsors before